Welcome to the College of Complexes. This is our 434th meeting since we started in February 2009. We put a different speaker on every week, a different subject. We require a speaker to take a position on an issue or express a point of view. They have to be for or against something. We don't care what it is. We give them an hour to make a presentation. If they go over an hour, we cut them off. If anybody interrupts the speaker, we mind the interrupter. We listen only one fool at a time. It's one of our rules. Then we have questions and answers from the audience of the speaker. Then we have remarks, rebuttals. Everybody in this audience that wants to gets 5 minutes at the podium here to respond to the speaker said for or against. Our speaker gets the last word, gets the comment, close the meeting. That's how it works. But before we put our speaker on, we have time for announcements. If anybody has announcements, now's the time to do it. Any announcements? You have an announcement?
Oh, me?
Yeah. Come on up here,
What
make
should
it.
I announce? All right, wait.
Whatever you want to announce.
I'm just a fool, I won't make one.
Okay,
Oh, Susan.
it's Tom's birthday.
Oh.
Halloween.
Oh, Halloween.
We'll always remember that.
Can we sing to him right now?
Yes.
Happy
birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Tom. Happy birthday to you.
Okay, and the Latino Cultural Center has my art, which is in the back room. But anyways, they have a beautiful display for Day of the Dead, and it's going to run, I think, through November 6th. Okay, so please come. You know where it is, right? On Live Oak 75. Okay, anybody have anything?
Any other announcements? Now's the time.
No.
You got one for the Philosophers Club?
This is gonna be next week.
You don't want to make an announcement now?
I gotta find it to find out what it is.
All right. Any other announcements? Got any? No? No announcements.
Did everybody get a folder?
Everybody get a folder? Handout?
Yeah.
Did you get one, Veronica? Yeah, I just gave my copies.
Everybody has a handout, all right?
Oh, where's
It's important. Well, our speaker next week is John Beasley. He's sitting right here. He's going to be talking about our lessons from Karl Marx, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So that'll be good.
Ugly.
He'll give you a rendition of all of them. And on November 10th, we have Don't Like Fake News, Then You Should Not Be an American Indian. That's Gary Foster. He's going to talk about that. It's on your itinerary. I'm not going to read all this. On November 17th, on the power of small numbers, Tony Robinson, he'll be talking about that. November 24th is Thanksgiving. We will not have a meeting. December 1st, on the question of juvenile and criminal justice reform, Elizabeth Cooley is going to talk about that. On December 8th, the JFK assassination wasn't a mafia hit. That's Jim Gatewood. He'll be back here to talk about that. And December 15th, Cult of Saints and Relics, Medieval Martyrs and Miracles. That's Dr. Paul Benson. He'll be talking about that. It's on your itinerary. Again, I'm not going to read all that. Any other announcements? Did you have a chance to look at your...
Oh, yeah, so we're gonna have, okay, all right. On November 13th, the Philosophers Forum is gonna have a talk by Paul Tobolowsky on the science of miracles or something like that. And I think his basic thrust is how such wonderful beings as human beings just kind of popped into existence and all this amazing stuff happened. So anyway, that might be interesting.
See, now you got that all out of your system. You got the
Yeah.
announcements made. You don't have to feel like you have to say something yet. That's good.
Well, you're gonna make me do it next week too.
All right. Of course. Anyway, our speaker tonight is Julie Britton. She's going to talk about on recognizing that the only thing to fear is fear itself. She's a perpetual student, activist, and volunteer, trained and trains individuals in cognitive behavior and self-help mental health techniques through Recovery International and organization for persons who suffer from nervous conditions, whether in therapy or not. She's retired from 36 years of teaching and social work. She educated at San Antonio's Our Lady of the Lake University and the University of Dallas, BA, MA, further graduate hours in social work and religion and music. She will discuss basic concepts dealing with the peculiar focus on xenophobia, fear of strangers. She will exemplify and foster discussion of how the most, I just moved right here, the most ancient of emotions is played out in our current political environment. Julie will also include activities that will help us laugh at our fears. So without further ado, please give a very, very warm welcome to Julie Britton.
Yes.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
The puzzle is the fun activity. So if you want to pick up your puzzle, has anybody started on the puzzle and looked at gotten some of the answers? Okay, well, all the answers are on the second page at the bottom. And you just, they'll go to the words to use. You know, a crossword will give you the words, and you have to figure out where they go. And so the clues, I think you can figure out almost all of these simply by the root word. For instance, number 22. Look at 22 across. Fear of roller coasters.
Is there a word for that?
Yes, it's down at the bottom. It's easy to find. Coasterphobia. Okay, let me see. Number 7 down, fear of germs. You can probably figure out that one.
I couldn't find stage fright.
Germophobia. Fear of fire. You might be able to figure that one too. Pyrophobia. Yes. Number 13 down. Fear of small spaces. You might know that one. Claustrophobia. Okay, let's start at the top and just go down. Fear of public speaking, which is said to be the number one specific fear that people have.
Stage fright's not there.
Stage fright is not there, but if you look on, if you just Google phobias on the internet, there are hundreds of them. You wouldn't believe some of the things. There's lots of them. That's fear of public speaking is glossophobia. Fear of open or crowded spaces is, I heard somebody say agoraphobia. Okay, we'll skip number 6 for now. Fear of blood, number 10. Small amounts may cause you to faint. Probably hemophobia, good. And this one was a movie, Fear of Spiders. Arachnophobia. Okay, fear of everything or that terrible things will happen. Panophobia. Number 16 is interesting. Fear of the number 13.
Just a day.
Who said that? Was that Ken that said that? Triskaidekaphobia.
Gotta try it.
That's
It's
right.
gotta be part of it.
That's right, triskaidekaphobia. Number 17, fear is a belief. That's the definition of fear. Belief that there is danger. Fear of balloons is globophobia. Now, would you believe I did not write down the answer to number 19, fear of failure? Yeah. Well, we'll figure that, we'll see what's left over. Fear of abandonment is interesting. That's a big fear that people suffer. A-U-T-O, autophobia. Fear of animals, you could figure that out. Live, vile, and harmless. Both. I heard somebody say it.
Zoophobia.
Zoophobia, right. Okay, and number 1 down, beliefs can be changed. Fear is a belief, but beliefs can be changed. Number 2 down, fear of getting rid of stuff. That results in extreme hoarding. I didn't write the answer to that one down either. Disposophobia.
I don't see it.
It's at the very bottom.
Oh, there it is.
Triskaidekaphobia. Fear of fire, we said, fear of germs, fear of talking on the telephone. They prefer texting over, and these are fears that people carry to the extreme. That would be what? Telephone phobia. Fear of the unknown, anyone or anything that is foreign or strange is xenophobia. Fear of flying, aerophobia. Number 12, one of the 3 basic fears is the fear of permanent handicap. Fear that you can never overcome whatever it is that's troubling you. And up at the top, one of the 3 basic fears, number 6, one of the 3 basic fears is fear of physical collapse. And another one is fear of mental collapse, number 15. So 3 basic fears, fear of physical collapse, fear of mental collapse, and fear of a permanent handicap. And these are fears that people who are dealing with mental disorders classified as. Okay, well, that's a little bit of humor. I've been thinking about this topic of fear for a long time. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a professional counselor. But I am a member of Recovery International. You have a slip there about it. And it's for people who have deal with nervous conditions. Some people have had hospitalizations. Some people just have nervous symptoms, and like some of these fears we read about tonight. And it helps overcome these fears. It's self-help, mental health, cognitive behavioral training. I have received training, I have led groups, and I also participated in training people to lead groups. The founder of this organization was from Chicago. I guess all good things come from Chicago. Dr. Abraham Lowe, Polish immigrant. He had been in the war. He came to the United States. He became a neuropsychiatrist, and he became the head of the Illinois Psychiatric Institute in the early 1900s. He developed this training for the purpose of decreasing recidivism. He had patients that would come to the hospital, they'd be released, and in no time they'd be back again, and the cycle would repeat over and over and over. This is recidivism. He developed it to decrease recidivism and to help patients overcome the stigma of mental illness. And to this day, it's still classes, people get stigmatized by mental illness. He was not accepted at the time. Freudian therapy was the predominant trend at the time, but Dr. Lowe believed that people could do things to help themselves as well. And he had used, another reason he was not so accepted is because he had used shock therapy, which was prevalent at the time. He's now received endorsements of the American Psychiatric Association for his development of self-help techniques. Some people like to compare it to AA or NA for narcotics. There's all kinds of self-help groups. But this is, anybody can actually benefit from this because we all experience nervous symptoms from time to time. My presentation is based primarily on the principles that's developed in this training and my own training, both in individual and group therapy, and some coursework that I took at UTA. I wanted to be a counselor at one time, a therapist, and then things got complicated in my life, and I had an extraordinary event occur, and I ended up dropping out of that and going back to teaching. So I have special interest in, some people jokingly say mental illness runs in my family, and others say, well, it gallops in my family. You've probably heard some things that I've talked about before that shows my father had paranoid schizophrenia, my brother had it, my other brother has bipolar, and I have dealt with depression, extreme depression. I made the greatest progress, though, when I got into recovery because it helped me retrain my thinking. The emphasis is to retrain your thoughts and to move your muscles, not be paralyzed. I've been thinking about this topic, and then Hadi came. If you all remember Hadi, the Muslim that came, and the professor that came with him from SMU, when Hadi came to speak, it was to overcome fear of Muslims. And that man walked in here and he shook hands with everybody in here, passed out his card, and this is basically how you overcome fears, become acquainted with the thing that you're fear with. So that set me to thinking about it. Then a few weeks back, Tom said the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And then I saw this movie, and on the screen as it started, it said, the oldest and strongest, most ancient and strongest fear, emotion is fear. And the most ancient and strongest fear is fear of the unknown. So, globalize. How prevalent is it? Well, just Google fear and you'll see. There's hundreds of groups that go to help themselves. There's workbooks now for everything. And there's workbooks about panic attacks, workbooks about hoarding, there's workbooks all, and meetup groups in Dallas all over the place. So if you're into meetups, go on there and you'll find one. Then think about the language we use. Afraid of one's own shadow, bundle of nerves, my heart skips a beat, scared stiff, shake like a leaf. Our language this is splattered all throughout our language. It's so prevalent. But the one word that is the idiom of fear is the word danger. Fear is an unpleasant, distressing emotion caused by the belief that someone or something is dangerous, painful, or threatening. Whether it's real or imagined, you can experience fear. It causes a change in the body, metabolic processes, organic functions, and can induce one of three responses. If you're confronted suddenly with something that is fearful to you, what would be your first response? Fight. Good. Fight is one of the responses. Another one would be flight.
Right.
My response generally is to freeze. So fight, flight, or freeze are three responses to fear. And Dr. Lowe adds that some people live quiet lives of resignation. They can feel hopeless and don't try to overcome fears. Then we live in sort of a survival mode. We can't pursue dreams and hopes. Other meanings are fear of God, and that's different. That's reverential. That's reverence. Although some religions do say fear of punishment, I'm not into that. I don't believe in a necessarily punitive God. The angry father mode that punishes. Reverential awe is that definition. And fear is a very natural emotion. It's just an emotion. It's not anything to be ashamed of, afraid of. What we do with it is what counts. Irrational fear would be something that is real and likely to happen. In that case, we'll take precautions. For instance, if you're walking around at night, what will you do? What are some things you might do to prevent from dangerous things happening?
Carry some kind of weapon.
Carry a weapon. A whistle. You might wear, for sure, wear light colored clothing.
Speak
Some people-
softly and carry a big stick.
Some people take pets with
martial
them.
arts.
I don't know how many times I've almost hit somebody that was crossing the road and they were dark skinned, wearing dark clothes, and they were just like a void. I didn't see them until I was right up on them. So that would be a rational fear. You take a precaution. An irrational fear is fear of something that is imagined or very unlikely to happen. Fear, we read about fear, we talked about fear balloons, fear of spiders. Some people have the fear of being killed in an airplane. And that is, that you can have that fear, but it's slightly irrational because statistics show that you're much more likely to be killed in a car wreck than an airplane. I think the comparison is 1 in 1.2 million chances that you'll be killed in an airplane, and killed in an accident, 1 in 5,000.
Your chances get better if you're piloting yourself.
I hope so. Okay. What are some things we're afraid of? Nowadays, we're afraid of the big thing is what?
Our government.
You're afraid of government. Terrorism, one of the big things. A lot of people say they're afraid they'll become homeless. Fear of financial ruin. Fear for your social personality. What will people think of me? And that's really big. Fear of making a mistake, which is also really big. Recovery teaches that make mistakes are a healthy part of life. When I'm practicing the piano, I'll play it over and over and over, and one time I'll make this mistake, and then I cognitively think, how am I going to correct that next time? And then you play it again, you make a different mistake, and it's a scientific method. Has many tests. It's not just one test of a specific thing. They do lots of tests so that they can discover what mistakes are possible. I saw the movie First Flight recently, which is fantastic. Anybody else see? I know Susan saw it. It's about Neil Armstrong and the flight to the moon. I'm sorry? Yeah, it was really good. And they had some kind, in preparation for their flight, they had some kind of event occur, and the other guys were worried about it, and he says, Well, I'm glad, the thing is, I'm glad that it happened here. So the more things that happen here, the less likely they're gonna happen up there. So that, in that sense, mistakes are healthy. And of course, the greatest fear of all is fear of the unknown. I got some quotes on fear of making a mistake because this is so prevalent. It keeps us from doing a lot of things that we might otherwise do. When Michelle Valentino spoke a few weeks ago, she said, human growth is contingent upon the ability to learn from mistakes. Thomas Edison said, I failed my way to success. And then another person, I didn't get this person's name, says, we're all failures, at least the best of us are. And it says, if you're not making any mistakes, then you're not trying very hard. And I spoke briefly about the scientific method. Consequences of fear. Ms. Valentino said, the amygdala deals with fear and emotional response. The neocortex deals with the rational part, deals with critical thinking and reasoning. When we are in a fearful state, the brain is absolutely unable to create long-term solutions. That's important. And I remember a few weeks back, Gene Lance was here, and he said, I don't believe in knee-jerk reactions because they're based on more on impulse than reason. And recovery is based on reason. Also, it says we're unable to clearly assess a situation, to see what's actually going on if we're in a fearful mode. Recovery says we tend to be good observers of events, but poor interpreters. We tend to interpret insecurely, where the first thought that we have is, what have I done wrong, or how did I make a mistake? And so learning to interpret securely versus insecurely is part of the method. I wanted to say a word about suicide because, and the white male, because there are so many pressures, and we had another shooting today. It was a white male, and the bomb thing was a white male. But let's give the white male a break here because the rate of homicide is there, but also the rate of suicide is there. Pressures are enormous. Tyler, Texas, the county in which Tyler, Texas is in, is predominantly Anglo, but it has the highest rate of suicide in the state. My thing, and the person that was reporting this said maybe it's because the males are competitive with each other and are constantly self-critical, overly self-critical in this competition. I read an article in the paper the other day that said one father ends toxic masculinity. Not masculinity, but toxic masculinity for his son. He teaches him it is okay to have lowered feelings. It's okay to cry. It's okay to seek help. And you don't have to feel that you're weak if you experience these things. I saw a brown beret in Brownsville recently, and he had on his jacket a slogan that said, do not mistake kindness for weakness. And we see so much bravado on TV, on the news, all over, masculine bravado, which can be detrimental. To think you have to, be this macho, whatever, and take care of all situations. Okay, so symptoms of fear. What do we experience when we're in a fearful mode? If you think of a time when you're really aware of being fearful, what were some of the physical symptoms you had? Heartbeat, rapid heartbeat.
Sweaty palms.
Sweaty palms, good one. How many have had sweaty palms? How many have had rapid heartbeat? Okay, has anybody had shortness of breath? tightness in the chest,
Inability to move.
freeze, inability to move. How about dry mouth? That was big, used to be a big one for me. I had to go to a person who was considered my superior at one time to make a complaint, and I was very young, and I had never done this before, and I actually thought I was gonna faint, and I had black spots temporarily before my eyes. It was just like, oh my God, can I do this?
Stars.
See stars? Yeah, that's another one. People get spastic colons, headaches, stomach aches, loss of appetite, overeating, nesting habits, hoarders, the hoarding syndrome. People are nesting. They're building a soft, comfortable environment, protective environment. And some people believe that's an element to obesity. I can vouch for that.
If they don't find their safe space.
Mental symptoms a person might have. Can you think of anything there? A little bit more difficult. Delusional thoughts. I knew someone who thought that they had committed this horrible sin, and it was really nothing, it was no sin at all. It was just something that was betrayal to what they had felt was important before. And they thought that they would contaminate people around them. So the plan was to commit suicide to keep from contaminating other people. That's a delusional thought. Overly self-critical thoughts, judgmental thoughts, feelings of unreality. Experience that? Doom and gloom. This world is doomed. It'll never get any better. And in fact, statistics tell us that in spite of all we see, there is less crime in the world than there used to be. So these are, when we fall into that, and that's a big one, I fall into that one too. Racing thoughts, you just can't stop your thinking, you just keep going on and on. Racing thoughts. Procrastination is a form of fear. That's another biggie for me. Your fear, I actually feared completing things because my thought was, what will I do after I complete it? And I realized it was a void in my life. I had to fill it up with stuff. So, anyway. Dr. Lowe, what does he say about nervous persons? He distinguishes between a nervous patient and a nervous person. Everybody in here, I'm sure, at one time or another has felt nervous about something, maybe lots of things. But a nervous patient feels like it's an emergency. They can't stand it. They just can't bear it. It develops into a panic attack. It'll never get any better. There's a difference there. They see things, the danger is greater. They see danger where there is no danger of consequences. Tend to spotlight any emergency aspect of a situation rather than an averageness of it. For instance, if you have a car accident, well, that's a bit of emergency, but it's not extraordinary. People have car accidents all the time. But a person who is maybe considered a nervous patient would just feel their life was coming to an end. They might consider some drastic measures. They might cut themselves. They might harm themselves. So that would be the difference between a nervous person and a nervous patient. It's how they view it. Dr. Lowe says his patients suffer from high suggestibility, where the first thought accepted is the thought of insecurity. For instance, walking down the street, and you hear people that are actually, or maybe you're in a group and you hear people talking about you. Rather than thinking, oh, they're probably complimenting me on something, they're saying horrible things about me. It's an insecure interpretation versus a secure interpretation. Constantly critical, blaming, shaming, scrutinizing self. Okay, wait a minute, I'm confused here. Oh, Nervous people do not like change, which is true. I hadn't realized that. I learned that in recovery. Nervous people just do not like change. The least little thing that's different can get you upset. A lot of us have that to one degree or the other. And you know, with all the changes going on in our environment, it drives, in our political environment and other environment, it drives some people over the wall. Everything that you want may be out of your comfort zone. So overcoming fear is a problem. Whatever it is that bothers you, overcoming it is going to be out of your comfort zone. Everything we want is beyond our fears. It is healthy to have hopes, dreams, goals, but fear can hold us back. Our feelings can deceive us. And we say in recovery, feelings can lie. And they say, well, if I'm feeling sad, that means I'm really feeling sad. It doesn't mean that. Feelings are not facts. They can tell us that there's danger where there is none. You may be afraid of speaking in public, and you see that some horrible thing is going to happen. You might faint. You might totally forget. I used to have this dream that I would get up to play in a recital, and I would totally forget the whole thing. You know, we learn to bear the discomfort. Dr. Lowe said that it's actually the symptoms of fear that we're afraid of rather than the thing itself. Fear is a belief. Beliefs can be changed. We believe or fear there's danger. In recovery, we learn to change our thoughts and move our muscles. It's a training program. We examine what's going on in our inner environment and retrain ourselves. Let me see. Basic principle is we have the power to choose. When we have a feeling, the initial impulse that you get, there's nothing wrong with it, good or bad, it's just an impulse, a feeling, a thought, a sensation. But you have the power to choose how you deal with it. You know what acting impulsively is. Something happens and you immediately respond in some inappropriate way. But we learn that we have the power to choose, and that's what retraining ourselves is. Fear is a habit. So is self-pity, defeat, anxiety, despair, hopelessness, and resignation. How do we overcome fear? Quotes, Dale Carnegie. Inaction breeds doubt and fear. Action breeds confidence and courage. If you want to conquer your fear, do not sit at home and think about it. Go out and get busy. Clement Sloan, and I don't know who that is, says thinking will not overcome fear, but action will. Another quote, action cures fear. Inaction creates terror. The best and surest method in recovery, Dr. Lowe says, the best and surest method of dealing with fear is to act against it, to face it, to realize you're having it, and then move the muscles to overcome it. Meet it head on. And in your packet there, in the tan sheet, there's a list of tools, what we call tools in recovery. If you'll look at that, these are tools or things that come from his writings that people use when they get in situations. Dr. Lowe talks about fearful temper and angry temper. Fearful temper is something that on the back it will define that for you. Fearful temper is negative judgment, discouragement, preoccupation, embarrassment, worry, hopelessness, despair, sense of shame, feelings of inadequacy, directed against oneself. That's inner. Angry temper is directed out. Negative judgments, resentment, impatience, indignation, disgust. directed at another person or situation. And so some of the tools, if you glance over those, these are things that if you get in a situation where you find yourself getting worked up, things that you can use to help you remind yourself and retrain your thoughts to get through the situation. I'm not going to go through all those with you now, but you see anything on there that looks particularly interesting to you? A lot of people start recovery with one kind of about a third of the way down. It says calm begets calm, temper begets temper. And what we learn in recovery is not anything, you know, we see the wisdom of the world, wisdom in all parts of the world. But Dr. Lowe puts them in these little sayings so that we learn how to overcome things. Do things in part acts. If you think you can't do something, do this little part of it. Then do that little part of it. Break it down into part acts. If you don't want to get out of bed in the morning, first thing you do is put your foot on the floor. Next thing you do is push yourself up and rise up, and so on. Break things down into part acts, move the muscles. Okay, now I'm going to talk a little bit about xenophobia, fear of strangers. It's not a new phenomenon in our country or even in the world. As people came to America, feared the Indians. Then they feared it when the Irish came. Then they feared the Italians, the Japanese, Muslims, immigrants. This is not anything new. And actually, Dr. Lowe says that it is natural because these things are unknown. They're the unknown. It's the unknown about it that's fearful. But how you deal with it is the different situation. Fear can obscure reason, intensify emotions, and make it easier for demographic politicians to mobilize the public on behalf of the policies they want to pursue. We see that now, don't we? We see it with both parties, actually. This is Brezhnev said there. And when did this fear basically start spiraling out of control in recent years? When was that? 9/11. 9/11. That's when it really started escalating. And he says that it has been the three words war on terror has become a mantra. It's used for all kinds of purposes. It's used for people to push policies they want. So this is when it really kicked in here. A demagogue is a political leader who seeks support by appealing to the prejudice and desires of ordinary people rather than by using rational argument. And as a verb, demagoguing is rhetorically exploiting an issue for the political purposes in a way calculated to appeal to the prejudices of the ordinary people. So besides the fears we have in ourselves, we have fears that others are trying to create in us. And how do you recognize when someone's trying to do that? What can you, if you hear someone speaking and you find yourself becoming extremely afraid, how would you recognize that this is not a reality, this is an irrational fear, or this is a tactic, a demagogue tactic? But something that you might hear. Well, one thing is it's what calls temperamental language, extreme language, vile language, the worst thing that ever happened, and everybody believes this or nobody believes that. These are extreme polarities. That's usually manipulative. Another thing is if you read something and there's no author's name on it, legitimate press will document. They will tell you the sources. You can follow them and track them. And actually, one thing you need to do is check the sources, because people will tell you things, and I've heard speakers here say things that I went and looked up, and it was not what they said it was. So it really wasn't what they said it was. So following how to deal with that, recognize that, we can be deceived. It could sound very legitimate. I read one article on a website recently and I thought, oh my gosh, I think that's true. And then I looked and I thought, there's no author here. There is no name on this entire website. So, clue, nobody else has heard of this in the world except this person who's spreading this. That's manipulation. Okay, what else do we do here now? I have too many things here. Okay, let's talk about panic attacks. A panic attack lasts usually, as a rule of thumb, and as soon as I say this, somebody will tell me theirs was different, but as a rule of thumb, it was about 15 minutes. So I wish I'd known that years ago, because I ended up in an emergency room one time with a very serious panic attack. But the rule of thumb is you just have to bear the discomfort of the symptoms until they pass. Symptoms, one of the things we learn in recovery is that symptoms rise and fall, feelings rise and fall, and they run their course. After a while, they just kind of go away. So learn to do that. Go for a walk. Distract yourself somehow. Some people use grounding techniques, and the first thing you do is do what? Deep breathing.
Woosah.
Woosah? What is that?
Did you ever watch that movie?
What is it? You can tell us.
There was, I think it was with Will Smith and that other guy, and they were two police detectives. One was always getting upset, and he was going to a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist would say, just go somewhere, sit, and be yourself, with yourself, and meditate, and use the word woosah. Woosah.
I think I got it. Okay, breathe deeply through the nose, in through the nose, out through the mouth. A grounding technique would be to do 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Just simply look at objective objects. What are 5 things that I can see around me? What are 4 things that I hear? 3 things that I touch. Janet?
Have you read that if you take your eyes and move them back and forth, that it erases anxiety?
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, you just go from right to left real fast, and it calms your nerves.
I can see how that might work,
Yeah,
because it is a distraction.
Oh,
If you distract yourself from the thing that you're afraid of and that you're panicking over. We learn to tolerate the sensations, and the feelings go away after a while. And muscle movement, the eye moving like that. I know when I was going to college, one of our professors told us that teachers are always getting after kids that are bouncing around and tapping their pencil and drumming on the thing. And she said, the fact of the matter is there's no learning without movement. And she said, why we haven't learned that yet? Because 100 years ago, they did some kind of experiment where they gave an injection to the eye and couldn't move. And at that point, the person was blind. There has to be movement in order to see. And when I had cataract surgery, they put me to sleep to give me the injection. But when I woke up, he did everything on my eye with it wide open, and I couldn't see a thing because my eye was paralyzed. So movement is a movement, going for a walk, deep breathing. We learned, one of the things we say is that it's distressing, but it's not dangerous. You can tolerate it, you can bear it, you can get through it. And we're all born with different constitutions. Some people are born with a very sensitive constitution, and the least little event in their life might really get them paralyzed. Other people, they just go through life and things roll off of them. And that's by fate. It's not something we choose. We're just born with that type of constitution. So if you're a very sensitive, nervous person, you can learn to strengthen your constitution. And that's the premise of this. If you let yourself keep going into whatever it is and acting on it, let's say you're angry at something and you experience these symptoms, and so you act out angry. Well, the symptoms intensify, and that's called a vicious cycle. The symptoms increase the feeling, and the feeling increases the action. So we call it working down instead of working up. What are some things we can do for anxiety? Go outside, nature. They're saying now just seeing green is relaxing to people in nature. Drink water, create something, take deep breaths, listen to soothing music, take a shower, journal, find a positive distraction. They say that if you watch television programs that are factual, like these programs about animals or about space or something factual, that's a healthy distraction. Eating whole grains, humming. I went to a workshop one time and this lady was using the heart to soothe patients, and she was talking about it, and she said one of the most soothing things that people can do, there's two. One of them is humming because it stimulates the vagus nerve, which is the whole body. And then I heard recently that doing something in chorus with others, like choral singing, is extremely calming. And they say there's even fireflies, masses of fireflies in certain locations, that they all start blinking in unison. It's a natural thing, the unison. Pets, aromatherapy, exercise. When I need to work on exercise. And there's an app called Calm that I got on my phone recently. It's free, and it gives you little mindfulness sayings throughout the day. You can pay, and you can listen to different sounds and music and whatever. Okay, let's see. Now, what else? Okay, when we were talking about language, creating fear, I heard recently that only part of something has to be true in order for people to believe it. So my thing about it was, and some of you won't like this, but Donald Trump was saying, I'm a nationalist. You're not supposed to say that word, but I'm a nationalist. And so I thought, well, what's the big deal here? So I looked up nationalism, and it says loyalty and devotion to a nation. That's a great quality, especially a sense of national consciousness but it will exalt one nation above all others and placing primary emphasis on promotion of its culture to the detriment of others. That's the negative part of it. So you can hear something that's partially good, and this is with all kinds of things. This can happen. Another word, there's buzzwords. Socialist is another word. Progressive, conservative. These are buzzwords that get people worked up. And I think that's basically all I was going to talk about today. Oh, also, when you're getting in touch with your fears, there's a lot of fears that we have that we don't realize that we have. And an example of this was I consider myself not prejudiced, but I went to teach in South Oak Cliff, and the first PTA meeting I went to, there was this whole big room full of people, and they were all African American, and I was white. And I walked in and I saw this, and then this fear just rushed over me. I had never been in the minority like that before. And I consciously knew this was irrational because I knew there were other white teachers that worked there, and nobody had ever been injured in that school by another, faculty member or anything. So we can have irrational fears. I heard one speaker say that she had a child that became ill, and she rushed her to the emergency room, and that she was there so long that she fell asleep. And then when someone woke her up, she looked up, and here was the woman with the Muslim headdress. And her first instinct was, they cannot treat my child. But then she realized, this was an irrational fear. It was not based on, this was a medical professional. And so we can have irrational fears. The trick is to know when we're operating, but everybody has them, and they're natural. But the trick is to know when that is caught up, what you're operating from emotionalism rather than from reason. So that's my presentation for today.
You say there and answer questions.
With regard to treating mental illness or mental problems or anxieties and things like that, are there any natural substances that you would recommend? I mean, people take like valerian root and that sort of thing versus some of the things they give people that say are bipolar. They give them lithium, which is lithium carbonate, which is a toxic thing.
Well, I'm not an expert on that, but you are absolutely right. There's all kinds of remedies that people use. And I know at one point, St. John's wort was really big, and people use essences of lavender and different essential oils that are calming and soothing. And there's a lot of those, and those actually do help work for some people. People who are extremely ill, though, I take medications. And I would not be here today if it were not for my medications. So it just depends upon the person. There's no blank rule. They have a new treatment now that is magnetic. And the doctor that I heard speaking about it said that 70% of his patients responded to that. And they have a DNA treatment that it sends magnetic impulses into the brain, and you go for, I forget how many weeks, 6 weeks or something, and then only go it once every 6 months after that to keep it going. But he says now they have a DNA test as well that anybody can use, and you can tell how responsive a person will be to any medication, which is fabulous. Yeah. Any over-the-counter, they're making improvements. They're making improvements. Susan?
Yeah, Julie, when I was looking at your list of fears, there was one that I don't know if this is just recent, but my husband's best friend was a policeman, and he said when his son was getting married, he was going to dress up like a clown because his son feared clowns. And then I noticed, yes, my grandchildren, I had like a clown bang, and they're going, that is so creepy. And then I realized that there is, I don't know if it's something new, a fear of clowns.
I've heard about that a lot recently.
Yeah.
Extreme reactions to clowns. I don't understand it,
I
but
don't understand movies
like your comments on this. I think something that can give you constant movement and change at home is just get a couple of cats.
Cats are very helpful. Pets are.
They can also drive you nuts.
Pets are, yes.
Oh, dogs are wonderful.
Pet snakes.
Well, I have to admit, I've never trusted Ronald McDonald.
Okay.
But I wanted to ask, if in any of your research, have you ever come across the opinion or stance that in cases of real danger, fear is a luxury you can't always afford? What is your comment on that?
That's an excellent question, and I don't know quite how to respond to it, but I do know Tom's birthday is coming up. So I bought him a movie tonight called 12 Strong. Did anybody see that movie when it was out recently?
About a jury.
No, it's after 9/11. No, not many people heard about this, but there was a team of special, what do you call them? Special ops team that within 2 months they sent into Afghanistan. And when I saw the things they did, I thought, oh my God, that's the most heroic thing I've ever seen in my life. It was incredible. And nobody knew about it because they kept it secret because they were afraid that it would be dangerous for them when they got back. And the person who became the president of Afghanistan at one time was the one working with them. It was just absolutely heroic. And I was thinking about this afternoon, and I thought, well, I guess to some extent they have prepared for this. I mean, they've done everything. They know objective things to do. But when it comes down to it, really doing some of those things, they just went right into the middle of fire on horses, was it camels or horses? And tanks all around. It was unbelievable. They were really heroic. Firemen too, yeah. That movie also, I don't remember the name of it. Yeah, about the firemen that actually ended up burning to death. And in the movie you could see them standing out there and all these flames around them.
I want to see that one.
It
I
was.
want to ask you a question, but first, my younger son would turn white as a sheet when he went to get a shot. And other things would happen to him too that were unpleasant. But I said, Daryl, imagine your skin having a little hole in it and the needle going right through that hole. And I was so surprised. I mean, he had no more fear after that.
Oh, that's interesting.
Just telling him that one thing. Yeah, I was so thankful.
Yeah.
But anyway, there's a great book called Tapping. Have you heard of it?
Called what?
Tapping.
Yeah, I've heard.
It's been around for years, and people use it and have incurable illnesses and they overcome. I guess it's all tied into psychological whatever. Yeah, and it's just fantastic. Yeah.
Well, I was at the eye doctor with my husband, and the nurses come out and go, please come here, please come here. This Tom is like the bravest man, he can do anything. He did not want his eye drops, and they had like 3 people holding him down. I had to come and go, Tom, it's eye drops. So we all have our
Irrational. Yeah.
Mine's my ear.
Like in the training, we ask people, how many have experienced this? How many have experienced that? And hands would go up. And the lesson that you learn is everybody has fears. It's average to have a fear.
John mentioned Pet Rocks. The company that started first selling the Pet Rocks was called Rock Bottom. And whenever it was in San Francisco, whenever you would call their number, the receptionist would answer and say, congratulations, you've just reached rock bottom. To me, courage can only be measured by the degree of fear that it overcomes. There are people who seem to have no fear. I think Patton was one in World War II. I question whether courage was even an issue with them.
Do you have a comment?
People have no fears. I doubt that he had no fears. I mean, he was brave in what he did, but to have no fear, I think that's pathological. I think. I'm not an expert, as I said, but I think it's pathological if you think you're absolutely afraid of nothing.
Yes, Billy, do these various fears carry a stigma that the people should hide because it...
Oh, excellent. That's what I think the male thing is. What that man was talking to his son. A boy is not supposed to cry. That's a stigma. And the mental patient, that was one of the main things, is they wouldn't go out into society, and if they showed a symptom, they would be embarrassed, and then they would get nervous over that, and it would increase the thing. And so stigma is huge, and National Alliance for Mental Illness calls themselves stigma busters. The other day, I was talking to one of my neighbors, and she's a police officer, and she was telling me, she saw this puzzle, and she said, "Are you teaching again?" I said, "No, I'm talking about fear." And she said, "You know, I see a therapist, and the things a police officer goes through, you know." And she said, "I hope the day comes when we can talk about having depression or whatever, just like we talk about diabetes, heart attack." So, but we're a long way off from that right now. There's a lot of people that, and they say they don't separate the mind from the body anymore. It's all one unit. The mind and body works together.
Well, actually, Patton used fear. He used to tell his officers that he wanted his troops to fear him more than the enemy. And he did have a real, I don't know which exact symptoms he displayed of the symptoms you talk about, but he actually was a very fearful person, and he basically said, act the part and then step into it.
Yeah, great.
What do you think about that?
I think that's perfect. That's one of the things that they tell you in recovery. Be careful about what you start trying to do, because you will become that. And if you feel like you're like me, I was humongously critical. Somebody told me one time being around me was like being around a hair shirt. And I thought, you're not talking about me. But that was when I was young. And after a while, I began to realize things that I did that irritated people. But you act like you want to be, and then all of a sudden you realize, I am that thing. I am that thing.
It seems like I've read that various services, Army, Navy, and all, always put very young people in submarines because they feel young people feel more invincible. Have you read that?
No.
Yeah, they feel like, nothing can ever harm them or hurt them.
In a submarine.
Yeah, because they're young and they feel, everything's
My-
just great.
My brother who had schizophrenia, he was in a submarine, and he was never the same after that. He would imagine that he'd see people breaking into the house, hallucinations, and all kinds of stuff,
Can I ask you, Julie, are you a permanent member of this
Yes,
society?
I am.
It's not just a temporary thing, you're
No,
permanent?
well, some people, our groups in Dallas now that we have are smaller groups because a lot of people have so-called graduated. But I see myself as probably being there the rest of my life. I'm kind of taking a break right now, and I'm not leading any groups. But I have had a hospitalization before with suicide ideations. And upon release, you have to have some kind of group that you can join to be supportive. And recovery was on the list, and I thought, well, I don't know if this will work or not. Sounds kind of hokey to me. I'm going to go into it as if it does. And it has made a huge difference in my life. Huge.
Schizophrenia is a very terrible thing. I'm not trying to make fun of it, but Just, did your father ever answer the voices in your brother's head? Or vice versa?
My father didn't hear voices. I know people who heard voices. They say it's like a whispering they hear. And some people in these groups that I attend have that diagnosis. And one lady used to see images from the television telling her to do things, messages from the television. I knew another lady that saw blood coming out of a painting, hallucinations. Those are extreme, that's schizophrenia. My father saw bugs coming out of a water pitcher. He had medication, and I think today, when I think of what he did, he was a veteran. And at age 18, he was the sole supporter of a family of 5, his parents and his grandparents and a sister. He baled hay. He wasn't diagnosed at that time, but he was the only breadwinner. And after he died, we have the house that he built himself with another uncle that we sold and got some small inheritance from. And I thought, wow, you don't see schizophrenic people doing that very often. So even though there were lots of problems there, he was heroic in a sense, I guess you could say.
I can't remember the actress's name right now, but she used to go around and lecture, and I went to one of her lectures here in Dallas. And she was talking about how she had this recurring nightmare that she was being chased by this huge gorilla.
I've had that dream too.
And she would go right up to the edge of a cliff and turn around, and the gorilla was coming on her, and she would always wake up just terrified. So this went on and on a number of times. And then on the last time, she turned around as the gorilla came, she yelled at it and said, "What do you want?" And it stopped and said, "Well, I don't know, lady, it's your dream." And that was the end of it.
Is that a joke or is that a
No,
that
happened too.
Well, I used to have that dream, and my fear was that I couldn't scream for help. And I don't know what happened one time during the night, or another time, and I did scream for help, and I felt really good after that. It's weird how you have these things, recurring dreams. I was hoping that you all could bring up some issues in politics where we see fear played out or used. You brought up several tonight, but maybe your experiences with fear and overcoming fear, possibly when you do your comments. Thank you.
It's your turn to talk. Who wants to be first?
I got a bunch of notes. You can't talk about mental problems and fear without talking about solutions. And a lot of the drugs that are on the market are synthetic, and synthetic drugs don't do as effective job, I feel, as the natural drugs. In fact, I think most drugs are probably synthesized from a natural substance in order to allow them to earn more money through patenting the technology versus basically selling the natural substance that they found that actually worked in the first place. Bipolar, for instance, is certain countries, they will send their citizens to a lithium salt bath. They will stay there for a month, and their orders are to soak in the spas at this health spa every day for so many hours a day. And after that, they're no longer bipolar.
Wow.
There is a herbal product, I think it's called Serenity, that was a natural form of lithium. Now, what I know about mineral supplements is that in order for a mineral supplement to actually work to solve the problem that because most of these problems that we're having, I think mentally can be traced back to some kind of deficiency, nutritional, mineral, vitamin, or a combination of such things. And because those things cannot be patented and put into a very expensive pill for the pharmaceutical companies to make a lot of money with, they just don't want to even face, they don't want you knowing that. They'd rather try to experiment with all kinds of expensive drugs and try other things that are more profitable. They don't want to do anything that's not profitable. But one of the, lithium is kind of a mineral substance, I believe. And so for a mineral to be utilized in the body, it has to be absorbed past the cellular membrane, and there are receptors on your cell membranes that look for certain proteins that have to be attached to the mineral in order for it to be, it's kind of like a gatekeeper, if you will. It's looking for that protein in order to determine whether it's safe and not toxic. And this is how we get our minerals. And a lot of the minerals and vitamins that are on the market today do not have these proteins attached to them because they're synthetic, they're isolated, broken apart, and so they're pretty much worthless. Most of the calcium that most of the women with osteoporosis are taking, for instance, are a complete waste of money, simply because they're not organic. If you get it from a fruit or a vegetable, then it's got the protein attached. That's what plants do. They attach the proteins, and that's why our body's cellular receptors trust that particular vitamin or mineral. It's because they know it comes from a plant and it's not some synthetic chemical compound. And so that's why I'm saying bipolar, if you're gonna get lithium, don't try it. Don't trust lithium carbonate. It's not gonna work compared to a natural form of lithium, and probably why herbal formula Serenity works is probably because they're growing it in a bed of natural mineral lithium, and the plants are converting it to a form that our body will recognize and view as safe to absorb at the cellular level. Also, there are a whole new class of products coming out called nootropics, and they increase the natural hormones that our body needs to alleviate problems of stress. They're very powerful for relieving stress and allowing your mind to come into a homeostasis. Even hemp oil is a form of neurotransmitter, because we have a system in our body called the endocannabinoid system, and it helps to regulate body temperature and different bodily functions. And so if your body's not in homeostasis, it's not a shock to me that you're going to have mental issues. And there's a company I got involved with not too long ago that developed a product line that's a nootropic, and it's a coffee, and they put some herbs and stuff in it, and it helps to basically, when you drink it, it will increase your dopamine, serotonin, and your endorphins. They also have another pill that you can take that will actually increase your oxytocin, and they call that their acronym for DOSE. And I can get you a free sample if anybody wants some. I have orders for them. Maybe next week, if somebody wants to try it. We always had fun at the meetings because people would come in there all grumpy. I got dragged to one of these kind of meetings, and they drink a sample of it, and 15 minutes later, their frown goes from a frown to a smile, and all of a sudden they want to be your friend. Because these are the neurotransmitters are what allow your body to communicate better. And there's so many miraculous stories. I could go on for an hour just on how people's lives have been transformed, especially people with mental issues and kids that have autism and ADHD and all of this are overcoming these problems with these types of products. As far as fear goes, I think the opposite of fear is love, and that's why love is such a powerful solution to everything, because you never fear that which you love. When you talk about frequencies of emotions, they have a lot of people are talking about how to understand emotions from a frequency level, and they've done studies on the effects of fear on our DNA and how it creates an entangled DNA, and how our chromosomes become tangled and it can cause health problems. Whereas love will cause the DNA to open up and expand and not tangle up into a knot. And the reason this is because when you have a frequency, you've got a sine wave, this is a wide frequency. This is the the wavelength of that frequency that I just drew. Now if I draw one like this, it's got a narrow bandwidth or wavelength of frequency. So the shorter the frequency, if we look at the spectrum of love versus fear, fear will have be a wider, lower frequency, and love will be a higher frequency, which will have a shorter wavelength. So if your DNA is a form of wave as well. And so as you have a shorter wavelength versus a longer wavelength hitting that frequency of your DNA, you're going to have more places where the frequencies will intersect. And when they intersect more often, you're imparting energy from one to the other. And so love energy will intersect your DNA more and cause more of an impact on it. Patrick Flanagan also, I mentioned, I think a week or so ago, that he claimed to be the reincarnation of Edgar Casey. I mean, not Edgar Casey, Tesla, Nikola Tesla. And he's in the health and wellness business, as well as developed some nuclear technologies for the US government. But Patrick Flanagan developed a device that affects people's minds and increases IQ, and I'm wondering what that might have an effect on. And then there's also, with fear, there's a saying that you attract what you fear. And that has to be also considered.
Well, I take the counsel of my fears. See, I'm actually taking an adverse position here. I think it can be helpful to take the counsel of your fears, and in a metaphysical sense, this is the conundrum of called bridging the chasm. Can you leap the chasm? Are you ready to leap the chasm? But your fear is telling you maybe you can't leap the chasm. Then you go to action, because action is the greatest eliminator of fear. And when you train, then in the future you can bridge that chasm. But your fear kept you from a great fall or tragedy or something like that. So I would urge to look at fear as also being a counselor. But then there's also a consideration that whenever you let an emotion rule, then you really you've subverted the other rational measure twice, cut once, assessing, logic functions. A situation comes to mind where I could have gotten emotional. I had a car breakdown where my car was overheating and I needed to get on the highway. The only problem is my car was programmed that when it starts to overheat, it cuts back on the gas flow. So, the traffic's going 60, 70 miles an hour and you would be going 2 miles an hour if you could even keep the engine running. So I had to work that out. I actually ended up going in reverse for about an eighth of a mile to where I could cross over a delta, go on a dirt road path that some other cars had taken, I guess during the time when the traffic was stopped. And that got me to an access road, and then yes, it did overheat pretty soon, but I wasn't on a main thoroughfare at night, which could have caused a very serious situation. So if I had just been emotional about the situation, that would not have solved anything. I had to rationally plod through what would be an effective course of operation. So I would say that having a reasonable fear in that situation caused me to take the actions that I needed to take to be safe and to come through that, and to have a car to get repaired. So that's one aspect of it, and I think really in total what the speaker is saying, inaction, if fear is pushing you into inaction, then you need to break out of that. You have to break out of that. Because action, I feel, is the remedy. If you can put your emotion to the side, what George Patton was doing is he was taking his fears and using them really as a motivation, and using that fear, that mountain of fear, to climb on top of that, to give him the impulse for action. And you find a lot of great leaders or great performers. I'm forgetting who it was right now, but I know there were some name of performers. Everyone would recognize the name immediately. They literally would go back and throw up, sometimes several times before the performance, because they were overcoming great fear to go out there and do what they were doing. But that was part of the element of their excellence.
Probably why they did
First of all, thank you for doing this research and program for us tonight. I think it was very thought-provoking. One fear that you didn't mention, however, is something that I became aware of when I was a graduate student some years ago. And I was in an advanced psychology class, and we came across a chapter in there called Communication Apprehension. I'd never heard of it, but I certainly recognized somebody when I read the chapter. It was my oldest daughter. She was 18 at the time, a senior in high school, beautiful redhead, straight A student, and she was absolutely paralyzed with fear when she had to talk to anybody. She went through 12 years of school without ever raising her hand. Anytime she had to give a book report, she threw up in the morning, begged to stay home. She had one friend. I know some of you are nodding, you know people like that. Maybe you are somebody like that. But I'd never heard it called communication apprehension. Well, at the end of the chapter, it had a little quiz. There were 20 things that you rated yourself on 1 to 10. And the very last question was, do you consider yourself shy? Well, I took that book home because as soon as I read that chapter, boy, it just hit her the nail on the head. I recognized her. So I had her take the little test at the end of the chapter, and she rated herself a 10, the highest on every single one except the last one. Isn't that odd? She didn't consider herself shy. But all of them were like, and how frightening is it for you to have to do these different things? And for her, everything was a 10. And so I had to read the rest of the chapter. And of course, what they recommended was not to send somebody like that to a counselor, because the worst thing you can do is to talk to somebody. You know, you don't want to do that. What you're really looking at is a phobia, just like we've been talking about a lot of these fears. They're phobias. And what you do is get a counselor who treats a phobia, which is not like counseling. And so I went through some of the community colleges to see if I could find one of their counselors or recommend a counselor who could treat phobias. And I did find somebody. She ended up having 11 sessions with a counselor that specialized in phobias. And it went on my insurance. The first day, the counselor asked her to do something. We talked about taking action with a fear. Asked her to go to school the next day and say hello to 2 people. Okay, we're talking about treating a phobia with the easiest thing you could possibly do, working up to something that's more challenging. So she went to school the next day and said hello to 2 boys in her class, and they both asked her out. Because she never said a word to anybody. So that was a very positive reinforcement, you see. And she went through the 11
Wow.
sessions and eventually got better and better. What was the problem with being that scared to talk to people? One is that if she never could ask a question, if you weren't really smart, you could really miss something. In fact, there was one thing she never did learn, that was how to subtract a bigger number from a smaller one, how to borrow, and that because she wouldn't ask a question. She didn't. That's the one thing she never understood in all her time going to school. But it certainly affected her social life. It also affected what she wanted to do as a profession. She was a senior in high school. What do I want to do? What do I want to major in? Anything she was interested in involved her talking to people. So she was limiting her options, and as I say, her social life, even as I said in the chapter, where you might live, and you might get a little job that sets you back in the corner where you didn't have to talk to people. So it really affects life so tremendously. And she just turned out to be a miracle. If you saw her today, you wouldn't believe me for me to describe her like that. She was an absolute 180 on that. She was outgoing and bubbly. She ended up having a job in benefits, where she had to go to other companies that this company owned, subsidiaries, and explain their new benefits program. First time that happened, she said, and they asked me to go and give this talk to this new company, and they thought I could do it. She didn't know she could do it. And she went out and did it. Again, another positive reinforcement. People think you can talk to people, but when you can't, you just don't understand that. So I think that's one of the phobias that's really important to recognize, and if you see people like that, to get them some help, and it can be cured, it really can.
Since we're talking about fears and phobias and things like that, I went through 21 years of counseling. It's probably one of the best investments I've ever made in my life. Probably is the best investment I ever made in my life. There were times in the 70s and early 80s when I would wonder if I was going to make it. I don't know what it was, but it was just a kind of feeling like, I just don't think I'm going to make it. Something's going to collapse or fall apart or something like that. And so I started going to counseling in 1981. I lost my job in 1981, I guess. And, went home and cried and all that kind of stuff. And I decided it was time for me to do something about it, which I did. And I saw a counselor for about 12 years. And then various other counselors, probably about 5 or 6 counselors total. And, there's when you see counselors, you can get to the point where you've reached the end of that counselor's usefulness for you. They may still be useful for somebody else or for some other stuff, but I got to the point with my first counselor where I felt like I was just like nibbling around the edges, and there just wasn't anything more he could do. And then I moved on to another counselor. But anyway, I went through 21 years of that, and I feel very healthy, emotionally, mentally, stuff like that. Don't worry about things. Well, I do worry about things. I'm concerned about things. But there's a lot of things to be concerned about, but I don't get all bent out of shape about it, life goes on, you deal with it, and you do what you can. So, and the thing about counseling is that I learned during that time is that everybody operates from their feelings. The people that insist absolutely that they're being logical are operating from their feelings. They are operating from their feelings more than other people. So whenever somebody insists that they're being logical, don't believe them.
In handwriting analysis, when people have wide spacing in their handwriting, it means what they have is delayed reactions. Like I have that because I have a strong rightward slant, which means I'm very sensitive, and I sort of deny that and think I can, be in any kind of difficult situation, and I can, but then maybe the next day it affects me. And if you see people with with very rightward slant in their handwriting. They're ultra sensitive. And hopefully they have fairly wide spacing in the handwriting, between words I'm talking about, not necessarily between letters. And it's a good thing I studied handwriting analysis, I guess, or I maybe wouldn't understand that.
Oh, my leg went to sleep.
I studied that too.
Well, this is interesting. I had a very interesting childhood. We lived in a small town, country town in Florida. The paving ended at our property and went out to the woods beyond then. And I had a quarter horse and a beagle. And we spent a lot of time out with nature, which to me was a lifesaver. I had an older brother, 4 years older, who was 6'3" at the time when I was a little bitty kid. And his biggest delight, I felt, in life was trying to figure out ways to make my life miserable. He just tantalized the hell out of me constantly. So I was a little kid who was very nervous. In addition to that, we had a very loving father who unfortunately was also an alcoholic, and when he would come home drunk, out into the woods. Then my older brother was killed in a hunting incident. I'm not going to say accident. And I felt just terrible about it because I loved my brother and I was devastated by the loss, and yet I hated my worst enemy in another way, and I was rid of him. So I had this terrible conflict in myself. Then my parents scooped us up and they started a new business up in the Chicago area, and we went to, my sister and I, to a boarding school in St. Louis. So we had to get up by bugle call, 6 o'clock in the morning. 2 minutes later, blast went off. And if we didn't have our little feet out in the hall, we got a demerit and 3 demerits, and you couldn't go off campus that weekend. You know, tremendous discipline. Well, I had this great sense of lack of this empty place where my brother used to be. So as a little tiny, scrawny kid, I started joining every athletic team I could. And that meant B soccer in my freshman year and the track team. And then B soccer my sophomore year and the C football team. And then the B football team and the A track soccer team and track for all 4 years. Anyway, all the athletics I could do. And I ended up in my last 2 years being first string on everything. And in college I did 4 years of track and 3 years of football and lettered in all of those. So I felt like, and I graduated from college at 155 pounds, so I was still a small guy relatively, but I felt that I had accomplished a few things. That gave me a great sense of accomplishment to do that, and I know that I worked very, very hard in trying to keep up with the other guys who were a lot bigger than I was in most instances. But I'll tell you, in all of the fears and the challenges that I had, and one of them was academic, because my mind was racing. And I had to learn how to get calm and think and work through things. The first couple of years in high school, I was an extreme manic depressive. I would wake up one morning and it was a nice day and it'd get better and better and better and better, and then it would get forensic almost, kind of. And then I would fall 1,000 feet down to the rocks and life was over. I didn't want to take another breath. And I couldn't figure that out, so I started looking at it by backing out of my body in a social situation and saying, okay, how would my friend Paul react to this? And then I would model my reactions to things from people I appreciated in my group, and sort of molded another character in that way. Well, throughout it all, I think that the one major thing that kept me going and alive was a firm recognition of the presence of one infinite mind, God, divine love. Whatever you want to call him, you know, whatever religion, there's only one of them. However we define or misdefine or whatever, or partially define. And I'm gonna talk about one little incident I had in college. Well, first, I got addicted to building and flying model airplanes as a little kid, and I went all the way through high school and college doing that, and I was determined to be an aeronautical engineer until I got into this college that was liberal arts. And so I ended up realizing there's a whole lot more to life than just math and physics. And I got interested in languages. I started learning French and Latin and then history and literature, and pretty soon I was looking at a whole lot of other things in life as well. So I ended up getting a Bachelor of Arts degree with a major in physics and a minor in math, probably the only one in the country. The rest of them were BS's, not in the slang term. But this sense of reliance on that presence of that infinite mind within you, where it's stated that the kingdom of heaven is. I had, for instance, my fall quarter of my senior year, I was so compulsive, I was taking 15 hours in a, 12-hour max semester. The 3 hours were do 500 physics problems neatly in a notebook and turn it in. And I was on the football team and in a play. Now, play practice meant 5 nights a week, go down to the field house after dinner and have play practice till midnight. So when am I going to study? I was working hard to have any time to study at all. And I was in this class of Greek tragedies. We would read one play each week, analyze it and write a critique on it, turn them in, he'd grade them all, and we analyze each other's paper during the rest of the week. And I had read the Agamemnon by Aeschylus, and I had gone through it twice during the week. And I got up to Sunday evening at 10 o'clock, sat at my desk, everybody was out having a good time, thank goodness. And I thought, okay, this is impossible to write this paper by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. I said, all right, then we're going to have to, I'll be quick, we're going to have to rely on something beyond human ability. So I turned in my consciousness to, what does the concept, the presence of infinite mind mean to me right here and now? And I stopped thinking. And everything got very quiet, and I just sat there, and after a while, in my mind, this switchboard with rows and columns of switches appeared, and these gray, white, fuzzy, like ostrich egg bundles started floating around with the switchboard, and I would see which switch it was connected to, and I would watch it click off, and it would disappear. Well, these were these were symbols of thoughts. This was a method of stopping the thinking completely. And after a while, I got totally silent, and that disappeared. And then I had a thought, read the play one more time. So I opened my eyes. I took the book. It's a different state of consciousness now at this point. It's totally calm. And I read through that play very carefully and very analytically, and I marked passages that somehow I thought that might make a good quote in a paper. Didn't know what the paper was going to be. And then I put it down, and then closed my eyes, and that only took me 45 minutes. It had taken me first 2.5 hours and then 2 hours to read the play during the week. So my whole perception of the passage of time was altered. And I closed my eyes again, the switchboard reappeared, more bundles got shut off. It left, and then I sat there, and where the switchboard had been appeared in my mind's eye a piece of paper, black printed letters, the text of the paper. And I opened my eyes, I had a little Olympia portable typewriter on my desk, took a piece of paper and threaded through it. And I looked at this paper now with my eyes open over the table, and I copied 10 pages. And everywhere there was a quotation, I checked the book, it was one of the ones I had marked, and it was letter correct. Then I did a footnotes page and a title page and stacked them and stapled them, put them on my desk, and I was in bed at midnight. That entire process took 2 hours. Now, I handed it in the next day, and the following week it didn't come back with the other papers that he had graded of that week, and other kids asked me about it, and I said, well, I don't know, I'm worried about it. I haven't read it myself, and I didn't really spend a lot of time on it. The following week he came back and he said that he thought the paper was so outstanding that he took it to a faculty committee, and they gave it what's called the Golden Book Award, which means that a copy of it was put in a notebook in the library on a pedestal for people to read. And they had awarded that once every 4 or 5 years, and from the late 1800s when the college started, that book was only about 3 or 4 inches thick. Now, I didn't write that paper. I relied on a much greater sense to take me through that very fearful process, because if I hadn't been able to do that, I probably wouldn't have graduated that year. I failed even the course on the physics and math equations. Anyway, that's one thing I didn't hear mentioned this evening, but I think that when it comes to fear, the greatest asset you have is to turn to that presence that is within all of us, that can give us all the intelligence and intelligent ideas, all of the solutions we ever need to any problem. And that's all we have to do.
An acronym that didn't get mentioned is fear is false evidence appearing real. And another thing that I failed to mention that I wrote down here is other solutions such as joining martial arts, meditating, affirmations. There are things called blue rooms that I'm just now finding out about. People go into bariatric chambers, oxygen. All of this is designed to do one thing, is to make your body operate with and handle stress better. Stress is the greatest killer, and it causes all of our health problems have a common ancestor in how they are developed, which is through stress. Stresses create various hormones in our body, like cortisol, which then transfer into being overweight, because cortisol will cause you to accumulate more fat and that sort of thing. There's a real weird metaphysical aspect of fear as well. One of the theories in the metaphysical world is that some of the dark side forces want us to be at war with each other, polarized and experiencing fear, because it's kind of like in the movie The Matrix, where they were using the human race as a battery. Fear produces a form of energy that maybe could be consumed by another entity. And this energy has actually been given a name. I didn't make this up. It's called loosh. And one of the sayings around loosh is to give Lucius his loosh, meaning Lucifer. Give him his energy. He can't. And the theory stems from these beings being cut off from God and not having any life force to continue to exist. That they, in order to have this life force, they have to steal it from other living beings. And so that's where that theory comes from. But martial arts is a thing that creates a lot of confidence in people, because once you've worked out and you've achieved a little success in developing some skill, you accumulate a lot more confidence and respect from other people, because they know you've been taking martial arts. They start to respect you a little bit more. And so that leads to more positive reinforcement, and you handle stress a lot better too. But stress is the big thing, and chemical stress, it's traced back to how you react to things, but if your neurotransmitters aren't functioning properly, that's where it also, your body's not going to handle stress properly.
I guess I'm the last one standing. Anyway, I want to thank our speaker for doing a great job here tonight. And a lot of different things we think about. As far as fear is concerned, looking at life history, when you're a younger person, you don't fear as much as you do when you're an older person, because you don't know as much. You're told what to do. When you're in the army, they like young people because they'll just run and take that hill, and they don't think about why they're taking that hill. They don't think about getting shot to pieces or anything else. They just do it, and they do as they're told. When I was in the Navy, we went through hurricanes. I remember 80-foot waves, and and 40, 80-foot swells and 130 knot winds, and until it got to be that bad, nothing bothered you. Because once you suffered through something, you didn't fear anything that came up to that. So as you got older, different things happened. In 1980, I was in an auto accident where I had 8 broken ribs, 14 different places, and a punctured lung and 2 blood clots in the brain. I was supposed to die. I fooled everybody and lived. So ever since then, I've overcome a lot of fear concerning getting hurt or this or that because I've lived through it. So experience, Hunger ist der bester Tod. That's a German expression. Experience is the best teacher. So anyway, that is something to think about. Julie brought up politics, in fear in that respect. Our president has made some treacherous comments, about different people, different things. And I think it's contributed to the pipe bomb reactionary results were revealed a couple days ago. And this is part of fear. We got fear of people coming up, a caravan coming up from Mexico. Fear of the unknown. It gets people stimulated. And I go back to FDR. He said the only thing to fear is fear itself. And we should abide by that. But our president now, he fears everything, and he wants us to fear everything. And that's not a good way to go. It doesn't work. And so the only thing to fear is fear itself. And we can't survive all that. We can do better. Thank you. And our speaker gets to comment all the comments.
Oh, I want to thank everybody for sharing and for listening. Very nice, kind audience to me tonight. It can be a tedious topic. Let's see, comments to you. Synthetic drugs. I know one of the big things that people argue over when they're in the hospital is they want their doctor to change their medication. There's a constant argument over that. And then when they get out, don't take it. And I went through a period of time where I just didn't want to take it and I didn't understand why. But it's a chemical, chemicals manipulating us. But my therapist said to me, everything is a chemical. Everything is a chemical, synthetic or what is a chemical. And they talk about GMOs, genetically modified organisms, foods and things now. And for a while we were all scared of that. And then recently I heard someone speak, nature has been doing this all along. It modifies itself genetically, and now we're speeding it up. So it's not anything to be afraid of. Hormones, hormone imbalance, very definitely. There's a physical element to it, I believe, in my family, because I was diagnosed, I had really bad acne, really bad when I was young. And the doctor said I have a hormone imbalance. So I've always thought it was part of my makeup. I do trust the medical community, and I do not think, maybe pharmacists are trying to screw us around with prices on drugs and things, but I do trust the medical community. I would look up neurotropics. I didn't know anything. Nutrients.
N-O-O-T-R-O-P-I-C-S.
P-I-C-S. Interesting. Thank you.
I've heard
And
it pronounced nootropics as well.
nootropics. Okay. And the thing about someone was talking about opening up chemicals, opening up something up, and I do remember hearing that there's a book called Open Your Heart with Love, and the doctor is saying when you begin to love, it actually cardiovascular system changes. Love is not stronger than fear, however. Fear has been determined to be the strongest emotion, and the most ancient and the strongest emotion. One thing I forgot to mention was humor. One of the things we have in recovery is that humor is our best friend. If you can learn to laugh at your imperfections, your limitations, your idiotic things, you've conquered it, a lot of it. Humor is our best friend. In response to we attract what we fear, the only thing I have a problem I have with that is that, I've heard people blame women for being assaulted. They attracted it. They caused it. No. If you were not assaulted, if you fear being assaulted, it doesn't mean that you want to be assaulted. Another thing is that, I'm losing my train of thought now. It'll come back to me later. Patton, that was a great, PTSD, we didn't talk about that. I do not know much about that, and we do not have many veterans at all in our program because veterans say that what they say is, and it may be true, that nobody can understand what they don't feel comfortable relating things that they have experienced, and they don't feel that other people can understand it like other veterans. And Recovery is doing some work, and National Alliance for Mental Illness is doing some work in getting some self-help groups for veterans too. Patton's use of fear, it worked, evidently. And some people say safety or sanity by any means necessary. Maybe we don't want that to be the thing in our daily life, fear. But in a drastic time, it worked for the soldiers, evidently. The lady even talked about her daughter. That's a beautiful example of having goals. She had goals, and it was her motivation for overcoming her fears and what she was able to accomplish. I didn't talk as a child. My cousin told me years later that when I was 5 years old, my mother would take me over to the people's houses, and I never said a word, and I do remember that. And it was, I had to be constantly observing what my mother was saying and doing and responding according to that, hypervigilant to my mother. But I don't have a problem talking now. I get nervous when I get up here. And thank you for bearing with me. Operate from feelings, definitely true. I heard recently that people don't vote from reason and rationality; they vote from emotion. And I really hated to hear that. I thought, that's not me. But when I thought about it, I thought, well, reason and emotion can go together, So, handwriting. I have white spacing in my handwriting. I didn't know that. And I always felt bad about it. I thought it looked like, this looked like second grade handwriting, But I taught second grade handwriting, so. God's place and spirituality's place in people's lives has said to be a huge thing for calmness. I had an experience though where you were told, and I've heard other people repeat this, their religion told them that if they were anxious, they didn't trust God. It was a sin. And that is, no, that's wrong. That's wrong. And I've heard a lot of people say they had that experience. If you really trust God, you won't have these experiences. Albert's example of his test, it's amazing what the mind can do. And I remember a silly example, but I had this paper doll color book, you punch out the linen sisters, and then you cut out these dresses and put them on the doll. Well, two of the dolls were not on the cover of that, and I thought, I can't believe that they got this. And then in my sleep, I realized, I told myself, look on the back. And there were the two on the back, you know. So I used to solve things. I used to braid my hair in my sleep, come up with solutions to problems at work in my sleep. I guess you're so relaxed at that point that things surface. Fear acronym on your puzzle, it says face everything and rise. There's a lot of acronyms for fear. The goal of recovery is peace. We say peace is our goal, peace within ourselves and peace with other people. Another word is balance. You feel better, you train your mind. Whatever life situations you're facing, you're able to deal with them. You learn to have tools with them. And recovery stands for realism. My hope is that each of us can learn to identify when we are afraid and realize how fear is influencing our lives, and to recognize when others are trying to influence us through fearful tactics. Only then can we become a nation not based on fear. And recovery teaches us we're always apprentices. We're always learning new ways to live. Einstein, who was more known for his science than for his politics, said our task must be to free ourselves by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole universe. He was a promoter of justice and civil rights. He supported Eleanor Roosevelt, NAACP, Thurgood Marshall, and he fought for 24 African American men who'd been arrested unjustly. And we talk about the opposite of fear is love. And it's not as easy as it sounds. Compassion is a difficult thing. We can have natural fears and affinities for things, but compassion for those that are not like us and things that we're not used to is a very mature, very mature level. So maybe another time we can talk about empathy and compassion. Thank you.